Well, the name of this report is How Did Pagan Gods Take Over All of the Religions in the World Today, including Christianity, including Judaism, and I'm going to show you in this report a little bit about the origin of sacrifice, blood sacrifice, child sacrifice. I'm going to show you what was happening in all of the nations when we wind the clock back a couple of thousand years, and how it has flowed all the way through. If you look at my previous report, Israel is not Israel, or the Bible tells lies, I made it clear with evidence to prove to you that the secret societies, as they claim, they're in charge of control of all religions. And I showed you in those previous reports that they had actually changed not only the Hebrew, but the translated English versions, and in particular in the Bibles with the New Testament. I showed you that the New Testament is added words to what Yahweh said, do not add words to mine. Do not take words away from my words. And the Talmud and the New Testament, I showed you, are added words to the divine words of Yahweh, the Creator God. Look, to begin with, I want to show you the words from Yahweh concerning Baal sacrifice, and then I'm going to ask you to make up your mind. What do you want to believe? Because I wasn't there. We're talking 3,000 years ago. But there's some very serious concerns raised by the words that Yahweh spoke to the prophets. Just before I show you this report, just put your mind back into World War II. Now, there was thousands of soldiers who said they did not believe in God. They believed in evolution. They didn't believe that there was a creator God, that he didn't exist. But you can read dozens of stories when the bullets were flying around, the bombs were falling, and they were in the trenches, and their mates next to them were killed. They were lying dead next to them, and all of a sudden you have these soldiers praying. And the question was asked, well, you don't believe in God. Well, who are you praying to? Well, I'll tell you something that has been proven throughout the thousands of years. When Yahweh God created mankind, he put into our heart the need to know him. That's there whether you believe in God or not. And that was their proof that the soldiers realized that their life was just about to be snuffed out, and they started to pray to a God that they said didn't exist. So now have a look at the words of what Yahweh is saying to the prophets about the whole Baal worship and sacrifice. Now, on your screen, I've given you a chart with the words by Yahweh, the Creator God. And are they the words from Yahweh that is disputing what you read in the Old Testament, in the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, which is accredited that Moses wrote? Item 1, 840 BC approximately. The sacrifices for my burnt offerings, let them slaughter for meat and let them eat. Yahweh does not accept them. Hosea chapter 8. Item 2, 840 BC approximately. Their sacrifices will be to them like the bread of mourners, of which all who partake are defiled. Rather, let their bread be for themselves. Let it not come to the temple of Yahweh. Hosea 9. Let it not come to the temple of Yahweh. And yet you read in Leviticus and Deuteronomy that Yahweh allegedly was telling Moses to bring animals in and sacrifice them. Item 3. 780 BC, Yahweh said, I hate and loathe your festive offerings. For even if you offer up to me burnt offerings and your meal offerings, I will not be appeased, and I will not regard the peace offerings from your fatlings. Question in Amos 5. Did you bring sacrifices and meal offerings to me for 40 years in the wilderness? In Amos 5 it says, for the first 40 years out of Egypt, no animal or blood sacrifices were instructed by Yahweh in Jeremiah 7. Item 4, approximately 750 BC. Why do I need your numerous sacrifices, says Yahweh? I am sated with elevation offerings of rams and fatlings, the blood of bulls, sheep, and goats. I do not desire. When you appear before me, who sought this from your hand to trample my courtyards? Bring your worthless meal offerings to me no longer. It is an incense of abomination to me. That's in Isaiah chapter 1. Approximately 600 BC, item 5, Yahweh says, your burnt offerings do not find favour, and your sacrifices are not acceptable to me. Jeremiah 6. Item 6, approximately 600 BC, thus says Yahweh, add your burnt offerings to your peace offerings and eat the meat. For I did not speak with your forefathers, nor did I command them on the day I took them out of Egypt concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices, for I spake not unto your fathers, nor did I command them in the day that I brought them out of Egypt concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices, in Jeremiah 7:21. So you see here, this absolutely rejects and disputes the words that you've got that Moses allegedly wrote these books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and quotes Yahweh as giving him instructions to kill sacrifices. But don't forget, where did Moses come from? He came out of Egypt before he fled for safety to Midian. Item 7, 600 BC approximately, they burnt their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I had not commanded and had not entered my mind. Jeremiah 7. Now, item 8, as you can see, again, I've put there, this is written about 1800 BC. Yahweh says, you shall not add to the words that I have commanded you, nor shall you subtract from it, to observe the commandments of Yahweh. That's in Deuteronomy 4. So you need to ask the question, what do you want to believe? So you've got to at least admit, it's quite strange that all of the words that were written allegedly by Moses in Deuteronomy and in Leviticus about animal sacrifice, it seems that it is possible that the secret societies have altered those words to suit the propping up of and the continuation of the Son of God sacrifice as it is today known as Jesus. And this is a transfer over from all of the pagan sacrifices, which I'm going to show you details of that now. Now I'm going to try and give you a bit of a rundown quickly as I can of some of the way all of the nations in the world were sacrificing and worshipping their pagan gods. Look, if you go into Google, if you go into Wikipedia, and you put the questions in there, you'll get all these. I will put as many references as I can up so that you can do your own research. I'll read this note to you. Monotheistic people did not use a human or animal shape for their god. Sometimes they resorted to using a geometric shape, such as a square block of stone. The Israelites sometimes referred to their, and it's got Jehovah God in Wikipedia, as their god block. This was first mentioned of this in the writings of Moses, Deuteronomy 32. In his Song of Praise, Moses compares the rocks of other nations and he calls God his rock. Now you ask the question why? Well, he would have learnt this as an Egyptian before he flew over to Midian. Egypt's common acceptance that certain locations could be holy or forbidden. These were usually associated with a temple, a tomb, or some special geographic place such as a great rock, a mountain, or a special tree, or a particular value. Moses took off his shoes at the burning bush because of the belief that the location was holy ground. Why did he do this? Again, he would have learnt this as an Egyptian before fleeing to Midian. But have a look at the words of what Yahweh says about this. Yahweh said in 1 Kings 14, he will scatter Israel to beyond the Euphrates River, that's Assyria, and he will give Israel over to the curse. They were totally rejected by Yahweh, and he allowed the Assyrians to annihilate them and take them captive in 721 BC. And you'll find all of that in the history books. Don't forget, you've just read in the beginning of this report that Yahweh God said in several places to all of the prophets, he never gave any instructions during that 40-year sojourn when he brought them out of Egypt. And we're talking about some items here where Moses was with them for that 40-year period. Now here's some more details of exactly what the nations were doing in conducting this kind of worship to their pagan gods. For offerings of liquids, that is referred to in the scripture as libations. Animal sacrifice is the ritual killing of an animal as part of a religion. It is practiced by adherents of many religions as a means of appeasing a god or gods or changing the course of nature. It also served as a social or economic function in those cultures where the edible portions of the animal were distributed amongst those attending the sacrifice for consumption. And you'll get a detail there of all of the nations that were doing it. Not only the Hebrews, the Greeks, Romans, ancient Egyptians, particularly for the cult of Apis. Now, Moses would have been acutely aware of this form of religion as an Egyptian prince before he went to Midian. A sacrifice would be made every day to aid the sun in rising, in honour of the Queen of Heavens in the sun god worship system. And this is what we're referring to. You know, it's difficult to understand this, and I hope you can come to grips with it, but repeatedly Yahweh said he did not give any instructions to sacrifice any animals during that 40-year period of sojourn out of Egypt. Now there's a fellow called Maimonides. He's a sage. He writes commentaries in the Talmud, and as we've already shown you, the Talmud is added words an abomination to Yahweh. So his wisdom is not, I repeat, his wisdom is not blessed by the Spirit of Yahweh God. But quickly I'll put it up and you can have a look for yourself as to what he says. Well, now that you've read that, you'd have to agree with me that he hadn't read all of what Yahweh told the prophets. Yahweh made no instructions whatsoever. So you can see how the Talmud is teaching the people today a pack of nonsense, a pack of lies. But the question is why? I'd like to know why, and I've got my own conclusions. You make up your own mind whether you want to believe the words of Yahweh or you want to believe the words out of the Jewish Talmud. A little bit of detail about the pagan gods and how these are the ones that have taken over your religion on this earth today. This is about Ra or Ra. Now I'll read it as quickly as I can. The most usual form was a man with the head of a hawk and a solid disc on top and a coiled serpent around the disc. Other common forms are a man with the head of a beetle or a man with the head of a ram. Ra was also pictured as a full-bodied ram, beetle, phoenix, heron, serpent and bull. Now you remember that when they came out of Egypt they made a bull, they made a calf to worship. Isis, it says, frequently schemed against Ra as she wanted her son Horus to have the power. Isis could use all the power that she had and have Horus take over the throne. Ra was overthrown by Isis. Then Horus replaced Ra as the ruler of the gods. Osiris was considered a merciful judge and the shepherd god. Jesus is referred to as the shepherd god. Osiris was connected to the vegetarian who died and was to be resurrected. The Bible is full of the stories where Israel had their high places and the trees that they used to worship. The cult of Osiris, the god of regeneration and rebirth, was particularly interested towards the concept of immortality. And you've got the Christian message today that if you believe in Jesus, you have a chance of immortality. As Osiris rose from the dead, the righteous would, in union with him, inherit eternal life through a process of imitative magic. Today, you've got the Christian world waiting for Jesus to come in the clouds, where they teach each other that the righteous will be taken up to meet him in the clouds. That is a lie. Osiris is considered the father of Horus. The Egyptians of every period in which they are known to us believe that Osiris was of divine origin, that he suffered death and mutilation at the hands of the powers of evil, that after a great struggle with these powers, he rose again, the same as Jesus rose again. You will see the Madonna and Child. In Osiris, the Christian Egyptians found the prototype of Christ, and in the pictures of the statues of Isis suckling her son Horus. They perceived this to be the prototypes of the Virgin Mary and her child. This statue of the Madonna and Child is still reproduced in thousands of Christian churches today. And there is the transfer over of the sun god worship system. There is a good reason in my mind why they cooked up false and fake doctrine that blood sacrifice was necessary, because this flows over to what they refer to as Jesus' blood sacrifice dying on the cross for the people's sins. But that is fake, that is false doctrine, and that is a lie. There's one very important factor that comes into the stories in the old book. I'm not a pastor, I'm not a rabbi, but you don't have to be to understand plain English. Yes, I've seen there are a lot of places where they've doctored the text in Hebrew and in English. And I'm showing you that in this report. But there's one thing in the past, and particularly for the future. You don't mess about with the name of Yahweh. If he asked you to call his name Yahweh, then you do so. So you don't mess about by calling him Hashem or Jesus, because he makes that quite clear in the first 3 commandments of the 10 commandments. There's one more thing. If you go back through the book and look at the way he brought them out of Egypt, it was a demonstration of his power compared with the idol power, compared with the pagan god power. And again, you've got stories that Egypt thinks they own the Nile. That has riled Yahweh, the Creator God, because he says, Yahweh says, the Nile is mine. And because they have pooh-hooed him, discontinued to know him, rejected him, hidden him, concealed him from the people, he has said that he will dry up the Nile. Now the Nile is flooded every year for thousands of years. I did a Google study on it not long ago and found that for nearly 30 years now, that particular river, the Nile River, has not flooded. The fish are dying, the reeds along the bank are dying. So let me now give to you what he says, what Yahweh says about the Nile. Now, because all of this is linked to the pagan gods, and just one more thing, when he brought the people out of Egypt, all the gods that Egypt had, the god of the water, the god of the sky, the god of food, the god of the grain, the demonstration of the power by Yahweh was to show these people that he was the God that provided everything, and his power was the ultimate power over any pagan gods. Now, I'm going to put this up on the screen for you just briefly. Because of his death and resurrection, Osiris was associated with the flooding and the retreating of the Nile, and thus he was associated with the crops along the Nile Valley. But Yahweh said, and referring to the Nile River, Yahweh will dry up the sea of Egypt, Isaiah 11:15. The waters of the sea will recede, and the Nile River will dry out and be parched. The river will become foul, and the waters in the moats will be diminished and dry up. The reeds and the bulrushes will wither. The Nile vegetation on the banks of the Nile and everything planted along the Nile will dry up and wither and be no more. And the fishermen will mourn because the fish will die. So it will put a complete stop to all of the industry along the Nile River. And that is a payback by Yahweh to these people who say they own the Nile and they have control with their gods over the Nile. It's going to be seen that that is all going to be put a stop to. Well, you've seen what's been going on for thousands of years, and there's one thing I just want to remind you about. Don't forget, all of the pagan gods had their birthday on their winter solstice, which is the shortest day up there, and it just happens to be the 25th of December. So that's another ironic pin that you can realise that we've transferred all of the pagan attributes over to Jesus and Mary. Now there's one more thing. You've seen on this report that the people who worshipped Baal, we're talking Israel and Judah. And we've seen here a report that all of the nations around them would cut themselves, mutilate their bodies, dance and scream and yell out to their gods that they were trying to appease, and their gods, they thought, would answer their prayers. Well, it's proven not to be, because in the story with Elijah said to the people, "How long are you people going to jump from one to the other?" when they were saying things in the name of Yahweh. And I've already given you the verses where Yahweh said, "They speak in my name, but I did not send them. Take no notice of them." Now, when we're talking about prophets of Baal worship, don't forget they were, according to Israel and Judah, they were prophets for their God, Yahweh God. But Elijah knew that they were not. Now, there's 450 prophets that are going to try and cause their bull to be sacrificed by their gods, and then as a demonstration that Yahweh is the only God, the power of Yahweh came down and consumed the offering that Elijah gave. But notice something here, and I'll just read it quickly. Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose for yourself a bull and prepare for it, but don't add fire to it." And he goes on to say, it was at noontime Elijah ridiculed them and said, "Cry out in a louder voice, for you're crying out to your God. Perhaps he is conversing or pursuing enemies or relieving himself. Perhaps he is asleep and you can wake him up." They called out with a loud voice, and they cut themselves with swords and spears according to the custom. There you have Israel and Judah cutting themselves, mutilating their bodies according to the custom. Custom of what? The custom of all the pagan nations around them. And when the noon hour passed, they prophesied until the time of the afternoon offering, but there was neither sound nor response from their gods. And then it'll go on to tell you that Yahweh gave the fire to consume Elijah's sacrifice. And then what happened? Elijah rounded up 450 prophets, it tells you in the story, and he takes them out and he then kills them. He slaughters them because of the evil that they had perpetrated to lead the people of Israel and Judah astray. Now, before I close this report, realize a few other things. There is going to be a time of trouble, such as never was before. I've shown you the Daniel prophecy chart, which shows to you that the evil banking oligarchy, the secret society's powers, is going to be destroyed not by man, but by the hand of Yahweh God. And in closing, I'd like to just remind you, if you've got a moment to, go and have a look at the previous report. I entitled it Prophecy Misunderstood. Look at the report I did, Bible Tells Lies, and the other one, Israel's Not Israel. And I will put up the chart to show you that there is two groups called Israel in the prophecies. And the words are all jumbled and mixed up together, but you will see that in that film, Prophecy is Misunderstood. But I'll recap it with you and put this chart up again to show you how Yahweh does keep to his promises. He made a lot of promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to David. And he will keep to his promises to redeem, to save, and to look after a group of people called Israel. But they're not going to be a group of people that are murderers, adulterers, idolaters. They're not cheats. They're not hypocrites. They will be people that are faithful to Yahweh. Have a look at this chart again with me. Now, you've seen this chart before on Prophecies Misunderstood. Now, the name Israel is owned by Yahweh. It is a name given by Yahweh to Jacob because he had overcome sin and was faithful to Yahweh, heeding his laws. Now, compare that with today. If a promoter of a football club found that his team were into drugs and booze, creating havoc, disrespecting the club's rules and laws, he then has the rights to sack the lot and appoint a new group. But the new group is still called by the same name. This is exactly what Yahweh has had to do because the first group of Israel became so wicked, so evil, disrespecting his laws, that he has now got a new group which will be called Israel. You and I don't know who they are. Only Yahweh knows these people, and they will be rounded up. He makes a promise at the end of days because he makes a promise that he will redeem them, save them, and look after them.